Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I actually made these cards at least a couple weeks ago, if not longer. They took longer to make than I planned because I went a little overboard, plus just the amount of footage, so many things, just life. So anyway, I started with some Ranger watercolor paper, and I chose this because one, it was bright white, and two, it's slightly thinner than some of the other watercolor papers I have, because I did plan on cutting all these images out. So I have the smooth side facing up, and I have it in my Misty, and I'm treating it with my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm using the Altenew Adore You stamp set that I got months ago. I had bought it, had all these ideas, hadn't used it yet. So I got all of the images out of this set. This is a huge set, so hence my Misty and this large piece of watercolor paper, because as usual I couldn't decide which flowers to use, which leaves. I was like, let's just do all of them. So yeah, treated the cardstock with my anti-static powder tool, inked up the stamps with my Versamark, and then shut the lid on the Misty, stamped all these images. And then for this first piece, I'm coating everything with some white embossing powder. This is Ranger's Super Fine Detail White. I thought if I went with super fine powder for this, because there's so much detail in these flowers, I think a person could almost get away with even just a regular powder. But I thought I would go, since I have some super fine detail ones, I thought I would use those for this, because especially the leaves too, they have these, really fine little lines on them. So got everything coated with the embossing powder and then melted all of it with my heat tool. And especially when I'm embossing white on white, I always have to move it around, hold it up to the light, make sure I got everything embossed. Any areas that look grainy and not shiny, you want to make sure to melt those. So I did one piece with white, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing with another piece of watercolor paper. Treat it with my anti-static powder tool, ink up these stamps with Versamark ink. And then with these ones, I'm going to use Super Fine Detail Gold from Ranger. So stamp all these images, pull them out. I've got my little coffee filter. I can pour on the embossing powder. And then I'm going to melt everything with my heat tool. I will say this one is a different sort of powder. It is more grainy, I guess. I think it's because it's this one is like super fine detail. You won't get like a smooth, shiny, raised effect, or as much of a raised effect, if that makes any sense. So it's different, and yet it's a pretty shade of gold, and it's really great for stuff like this that is like super, super detailed, because you can see all the detail even with this. So melted all that with my heat tool, and then did it yet one more time. This time I wanted to do it with black. I've said this before, I do not like black embossing powder. We don't get along. I usually make a mess with it. However, if I'm really careful and I'm really liberal with the anti-static powder tool, I can generally make it work. Plus, I'm using, this is the Wow Super Fine Primary Ebony Embossing Powder, and I find this one's pretty good. It's not as, I guess powdery is the word I'm trying to think of. Usually when you pour black embossing powder over white cardstock, you end up with this like black powdery residue no matter what you do. That's usually the reason why I hate it so much. But this one isn't too bad for it. So, and with these images, like I said, I plan on cutting these out, so I wasn't too worried about it. So yeah, stamped it, coated everything with the embossing powder, and then melted this with my heat tool as well. So once everything was melted, I've got this plethora of florals and leaves to color in. So I decided to do the black, the gold, and the white just to see how different they looked. The last few videos I've been doing, doing things with a black outline, with a no line sort of outline, or do white heat embossing, black heat embossing, and comparing like in the same video. You guys have really been enjoying that, and I've been enjoying it. It's kind of fun to see how different looks you get just by varying the outlines. So that's what I'm doing here. So this time it's black, white, and gold. And I pulled out my Sakura Koi watercolors just because I hadn't used them in a while, and I thought, why not? So I pulled those out, and just a water brush. And I'm just using like the lid and the side palette and all that kind of stuff to mix up the colors I want to use. So I started with the green, and I just mixed up a liberal amount of the green, since I'm going to do everything pretty much the same. Like I'm going to use the same colors. The leaves are simple because they're just leaves. But the flowers themselves I'll end up varying, but I do the exact same colors just to, one, compare, and two, it just makes it simpler. Otherwise, I would have been, as it was, I was still at this for a really long time. I worked on these in spurts over probably 2 or 3 days. I'm not even sure. I kind of bit off more than I could chew when I started working on this. And plus there was just 10 million things going on. So I did one layer with the green and kind of let that dry. I didn't really worry about it too much. That's the other reason why I love embossing so much. Embossing images and then watercoloring them. Because I find you can just move a lot faster. It is all contained within that embossing. So I don't have to worry so much about going outside the lines or just, you know, overusing water or anything, because it just helps kind of keep everything in place. So I can usually move quicker. I did super speed this up, just FYI. I don't move this fast in real life. I wish. I so wish. But I was able to move fairly quickly and not have to overthink it too much. So I applied the lighter green first on all these leaves, and then I mixed up a bit of a darker green, and then just picked that up with my water brush, and I was painting it more like in the center, and just applying it. Not really a whole lot of rhyme or reason to any of it, especially on ones like the black outline ones. I found you don't need to worry so much about the detail, because it's more, you notice more the black outline than you do anything else, whereas if you do the white heat embossing, that's where you notice more the color. So, and then the gold I just did because it was fun, because I was like, who does not love gold outlined flowers? So did that with the leaves, and then I mixed up 3 different colors for the flowers. So I did basically a pinky red, a purple, and a blue. And I was trying to mix up like a lot. Like I was squeezing out my water brush and really watering this down and like trying to get a large amount here in the lid, because I have a ton of flowers to do. And it's just, again, a convenience thing, so I wouldn't have to go back and mix. In the end, I did have to by the time I was getting near the end, because I ended up using up all this color. But I chose pink and purple and blue because these colors blend well together. So even like the pink and the blue, if they blend, they'll, you know, create a bit of a purple, etc. So I didn't want to use anything like really contrasting, because I wanted this to be as simple as possible. So I just went in and I would wet the area first. I'd do the entire flower at once. I didn't bother doing, you know, petal by petal, because again, heat embossed, everything's contained. So they're not just gonna like, you know, turn into a blob. You still keep all that definition of the heat embossing. So I would just wet everything with my water brush first. Sometimes my water brush wasn't even fully clean and I didn't care, because same thing. I'm using these same colors, so it didn't really matter. And then I'm just doing the whole wet on wet technique. So the paper's wet first, and then I pick up the watercolor and apply that on top, and then it just moves a lot easier. And I basically would do 2 colors per flower. Sometimes I would add in a third, depending, and just let the colors kind of do their thing. I tried not to mess with it too much. That is something I still really struggle with. It's like, it's so hard not to just help it along with the brush and, you know, do the blending. But when you can have that bit of patience and let it sit and, you know, blend on its own and air dry, it's really pretty, the effects you can get with that. But I struggle because usually I just don't have the time. I don't have the time, don't have the patience. So I started with the white first, and these were the ones, like, the colors are obviously, they're very fresh. They haven't been mixed up. As I'm going along here, you know, the pink is going to get a little more purple, and the blue is going to pick up some of the pink, and et cetera, which is fine. But it was just interesting to see how the colors kind of change the further along I get with these. So some of the flowers I would do, you know, purple and blue. Some I would do purple and pink. Some I would do pink and blue. And some I would just kind of mix them all together and create my own random purpley, pinky sort of color. So got all of these completely colored in, and I'm just using blue chucks here in the corner. I've had people asking about these. I just linked them on Amazon. I used to buy these from a medical supplier back when I did nails and that, because they're the same as what you get, they use at the dentist. They've got that little bit of a plastic backing on them to keep liquids from soaking right through. So I love using them for watercolor and for crafts and that. I literally have a case of them. So they come in handy for this, to wipe off my brushes, and then I don't have to worry about if there's anything underneath that, like this piece of watercolor paper. It's not going to get saturated with everything I keep wiping my brush off of. So I just keep folding them over until I have a clean, you know, spot to use up, until I've completely used it up, and then I can get another one. So they are super handy. So yeah, like I said, I linked them on Amazon with all my supplies and whatnot. So I'm just going along and doing this exact same thing with the gold outline, just getting the area of the flower wet and then dropping in the pinks and the purples and the blue and letting them kind of do their thing. So I was fairly liberal with the water. I'm more comfortable when I'm doing images that have been heat embossed, because like I said, because they're contained that way, I don't have to work as slowly and as carefully to make sure that, you know, because if you overuse the water, it can seep out past the edges if it's just a stamped outline, that sort of thing. Like, yeah, if you struggle with watercoloring, which I did in the beginning, I still do at times, just depends what I'm doing, but heat embossing the images first makes a huge difference. It kind of just takes the pressure off to keep, you know, the water from going everywhere and the color from going everywhere. It kind of helps contain everything. So I did all of the gold ones, and then same thing, set that aside, let it air dry, and then I'm going on to the black. And like I said, the black, you see the color obviously, but you don't notice as much of the detail as you do with the other ones, especially the white. You know, the gold, you see the gold, the black, you see the black outlines, the white, you see more of the color. That's the thing I like about white heat embossing images and then watercoloring, because it just makes the actual watercoloring really pop, in my opinion. So this is where I started running out of the color. So I had to start mixing up some more. And then I was going along, and by this point I was kind of getting a little bit tired of it anyway. I was like, oh, I have done so much of this, and it was just getting insane. But of course, had to power through, had to get them all done. So I'm just going along, wetting every flower, dropping in the color, and then letting them kind of do their thing. So I originally was going to just leave them at that, and then I realized I didn't do anything for any of the flower centers. So once I get all of these images colored in, I'm going to mix up, I think I just mixed up a couple of the browns from this little watercolor palette so I could quickly paint over and add that little bit of detail back in to the flower centers so they aren't like, you know, pink and purple and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, just mixed up a couple of the browns and then just painted those in, and then kind of dotted it around a few of the little like stamens and whatnot on some of the flowers. And that just finished all of these off. So once everything was completely dry, I fussy cut out every single one of these. This also took some time, but I basically sat and did them when I was watching Netflix or I was watching, you know, a movie with the kids, etc. And we just sit and fussy cut. Because I don't mind it in small amounts. This was, again, a little bit ridiculous. But I thought, why not? So yeah, I trimmed out every single one right on the line and then set them all aside. And then while I was doing all of this, of course, I'm like mentally thinking about how I'm going to make up these cards. So I decided to go with die cut sentiments for all of these. And I'll have them all listed in the description box, but also on my blog, like picture links. But I just used a combination of different dies for all the sentiments. So I'm using the Painted Hugs right here from Simon Says. I'm going to use the Simon Says Miss You wafer dies, the MFT Friends, the MFT Thanks and Hello, and the MFT Sending Hugs. So did all this die cutting with black cardstock, and again, die cut all of them 3 times, stacked all of them 3 times. So that took a little bit of time as well. Got that all done, and then decided I wanted to add some shimmer. So I pulled out, I have the Spectrum Noir Gold shimmer pen, and I also have the Wink of Stella. And the Wink of Stella is there on the left on the white cardstock, and the Spectrum Noir is on the right. So the Spectrum Noir is more of a brassy gold, whereas the Wink of Stella is more of a warm gold. And then on the black cardstock here, the lower area was Wink of Stella. This upper area was Spectrum Noir. So you can see how they look completely different. So I would say the Spectrum Noir is much more sparkly in your face, which is great if that's what you want. I almost use that because that's what I usually prefer. But I decided to keep this a little more subtle. I just wanted some gold sparkle. So I used the Wink of Stella on these black die cuts just to give it that nice bit of shimmer, but it's not like popping. Whereas the Spectrum Noir, you can see it whether the light hits it or not. Like that kind of brassy, gold, glittery, fabulous look. It's obvious. Whereas on these, I wanted them a little more subtle because I had all these, you know, I'm going to use all these watercolor flowers and they're heat embossed and yada, yada, yada. So I went a little more subtle. So I just ended up using my reverse tweezers to kind of hold these die cuts in place and then just painted over them with this gold Wink of Stella here. And you can see it just gives it this really pretty shimmer. And then when the light does hit it, so I just turn on the flashlight on my phone, then you can see the sparkle. So it's pretty. I love these shimmer pens. They're so much fun. So I did all those die cuts, set them aside to let them completely dry. And then I die cut a whole bunch of pattern paper that I have been hoarding, which I tell you guys all the time, I rarely use it, but I did pull some out. So I'm using my favorite things, the Hearts and Stripes pack, as well as the Dots and Stripes neutral pack. And I die cut those with the largest Simon Says Stamp stitched rectangle dies. And then I die cut some heavyweight white cardstock with one of the smaller stitch rectangle dies, and then figured out how I was going to lay out these flowers and the die cut sentiments and the pattern papers. A couple of them I had to do vertical for sure because they were those heart pattern papers. So I want to make sure the hearts are like in the right direction and not sideways. So, and some of these sentiments, some were larger than others. So it took a little bit of figuring to figure out which ones were going to work. And then I got to work adhering all of these together. And I basically came up with like 2 layouts for each set of flowers, so that I would use up all the flowers and the leaves from each set, aka the white embossed set, the black embossed set, and the gold embossed set. So I had 2 separate layouts figured out. So I did my first with the white heat embossed. Got everything adhered. Some of the flowers I popped up with foam tape. Some I adhered flat with my Nouveau adhesive. Once I had all the flowers and leaves for this first one done, I'm going to adhere the sentiment with the same Nouveau adhesive. So I did that with the first one, and then I basically is doing my mass production method where I do the same thing over and over again to get it all done. So I would do this, and then I would adhere it to the pattern paper I'd chosen, and I also adhered this with foam tape. So the white rectangles popped up on foam tape as well, because go big or go home. Why not? Let's just add a ton of dimension. So got everything adhered, and then I would go along and do this over and over and over again. So I would use the black heat embossed flowers, did the same layout sort of a thing, and then adhered everything, and just kept repeating it over and over again. And the nice thing with this, using the different sentiments and the different embossing, like they all look slightly different, but they're all similar. So I did all of these, got everything adhered, all the sentiments adhered, and then I needed to add some splatter because why not? So I pulled out my Prima metallic little watercolor palette here, and I sprayed the 3 golds with water, and then super spread this up, let it sit for a bit, and then really mix these up. You got to work these a bit to really mix up the color. They're very creamy once you really get them like mixed up. And the longer you let them sit, the thicker they're going to get, because the water soaks further and further into them. So I decided to mix up all 3 to get kind of a very similar shade to that gold embossing. And I mixed up a lot because I want to splatter all of these card fronts at once. So got all my watercolor mixed up, and I just put it on an acrylic block. Then I pulled out my splatter cubby, and I'm just pulling the brush and flicking it against the edge of the acrylic block over these little panels here. So they get just this nice little gold splatter. I wanted it all over everything. Pattern paper, the background, the flowers. I just thought just a nice amount of gold splatter would just give them that little extra something, which it did. So splattered all of these. I had gold everywhere. Even with the splatter cubby, I made a mess. I had gold all over the place, but it was so much fun. So splattered everything, set it all aside to dry. And then for all my card bases, I just cut down heavyweight white cardstock. And then figured out how I want to do the insides. I decided to keep the inside simple, not stamp any sentiments. I'm using the remnants of the pattern paper from die cutting all of the pieces for the front. So I cut those down and then adhered those to the inside of the card. So again, the ones with the hearts, I cut the strip long to put up like this because that's the only way it was going to work with what I had die cut. And you want to keep the hearts, like I said, you want to keep them facing the right direction. So cut this one like so, and then I'm adhering everything in place with my Xyron Mega Tape Runner because this just saves me a ton of time. This thing is wide. I'm not exactly sure how wide offhand, but it's over 1/2 inch, I think. So yeah, ran that on the pattern paper for the inside as well as I kept 1 flower and 1 leaf for the inside of every single card. So I adhered that, and then I applied the adhesive to the back of each card front and pressed that onto each card base. And same thing. I would do one, go on, do the next, go on, do the next. So did all of the insides and then would go on and adhere all of the outsides, just making sure to match up the pattern paper to the pattern paper I used on the card front, and making sure I'm using the right flowers, like the white heat embossed flowers with the white heat embossed image, etc. So it took not as long. Well, by the time I was at this point, it didn't take as long, it seemed. But yeah, these cards, honestly, to do this many with this much watercoloring and everything else, it actually didn't take that long to do, but don't quote me on that. I think after a while, I just became numb to the whole process. So yeah, I went along and adhered all these strips of pattern paper to the insides of the cards, and then would adhere coordinating a little flower and a little leaf. If a person wanted to, I would totally stamp sentiments, but by this point, I was just done with them. I wanted to get them done so I could start editing the video. And even then I didn't get to editing the video till 2+ weeks later. So got everything adhered, and that finished off all of these cards. So this is how they look compared to the white heat embossing, the black heat embossing, and the gold. Like, they look so different and yet so similar. It's just fun. So I will have links to all the supplies in the description box below the video. I will also have more pictures over on my blog, so you can check that out. That's also linked directly below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you still are, I really appreciate it because this was a very long video. And yeah, thank you guys so much, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye.